Namaskar, doston. We had a bit of a gap, but then we back again with our narration. We had examined the two civilizations, the Indic and the modern, and we looked at the merits of the Indic civilization, in what ways it was totally brilliant compared to whatever we are following today in the modern civilization. However, then we went on to look and examine some of the problems in history where a lot of misrepresentation has happened with regards to the Indic history. The timelines have been muddled and coming on up to the timelines with regards to Alexander's invasion of India, including the hoax of Alexander's victory against Porus. We examined some of the evidence that was available to us from the research work of some eminent scholars to look at the possibility that actually Alexander may have actually lost the war. But anyway, we are now in that period of Alexander and then Chandragupta Maurya and also Samudragupta of the Gupta dynasty. Now, there's a bit of a doubt here whether it was the around that 300 plus BC period which is currently given to the Mauryas. Is that the period or was it the Gupta period? But be that as it may, let's also look at some of the other factors. Like, for instance, the fact that the Gupta period is actually claimed as the golden period of Hinduism. Uh, whilst that might be justified to some extent, but frankly, not entirely, because the Hindu thought and ethos has been a continuous process. And a lot of changes have been brought about, a lot of books were brought to light, literature. This has been a common ethos with regards to the Indic civilization. Be that as it may, let's just look at, because at the Gupta period, even the Buddhist thought was quite prevalent. Yes, for most Hindus, the Buddhism was not something outside of their Sanatan Dharma. They even considered Buddha as one of their incarnations. And because we've had various kinds of thought processes, even the Hindu school of thought, you got various schools of thought. So obviously, the Buddhist philosophy was again one new kind of a thought that was available. But basically, I think because Buddha did not acknowledge the Vedas, so some people, especially the Buddhist organizations, then tried to distance themselves and become a separate religion on their own. No problem with that. That's fine. That's all history. But I'm trying to bring to light some of the robust debates and the thought processes that was happening amongst intellectuals during all that time, even in the Gupta period. In the Gupta period, even though it is considered to be a golden age of Buddhism, you must of Hinduism, you must just see how Buddhism also was very, very prevalent, and it became a very hotly debated discussion, not just amongst the masses, but even amongst all the intellectuals, which then trickled down to the masses. One such very interesting example is of Vasubandhu. Now, Vasubandhu, he grew up on the laps of his father, who was in Samudragupta's court. He was supposed to be a renowned Vedic scholar. So obviously, he was brought up in that entire thing of the Vedas and all that. But then Vasubandhu, when he grew up, he joined the school in Takshashila. But at a young age, he left to join a Buddhist monastery to study their Vaibhasika school of thought. And in that school, they had two schools. One was in Gandhara, that is Takshashila, and the other one is in Kashmir. The Gandhara school, which was for called Sarvastivada. Sarvastivada means Sarva Asti Vada. It's made up of three words. Sarva means all that you see, and Asti means this is it, and Vada means the debate around it. So obviously, it was a school of thought that looked at reality as being as reality, and the Kashmir school considered the Gandhara school or the Takshila schools as heretics. Means that even in that belief, they had a more fundamental belief in Kashmir. So obviously, they would discard the Takshila people, and they would not even allow them to come in or debate with them. So what happens is Vasubandhu, after having learned everything at Takshila, he then puts on, he goes on, he puts on the guise of a lunatic and crosses the border. Remember those days in India, I believe, and this is what the book Sanskrit Debates by William Cully Allen tells you, that in those days in India, if you were mentally deranged, you did not need visas from one place to the other. They were free to roam anywhere. So it's very, very friendly for disabled country. at that time. So he acts as a madman and moves over to Kashmir and somehow gets into the monastery and is able to convince them and take him on as a student. So he starts, studies there for 4 years, their school of thought. But then he pesters his teachers with so many questions that they're really very, very irritated with him. So, the main teacher at the monastery, what he does is he goes into deep meditation to think about this guy. Who is he? Where is he come from? What it is? Again, it tells you about some kind of a different skills that were available at that time. And in this deep focus mind, he then uncovers the small little details of Vasubandhu to realize that he's actually a cross-border guy who's come across from the Takshila school. So he confronts him, and then Vasubandhu agrees and apologizes that yes, he is from Takshila. So he tells him, the chief teacher tells him that, look, you need to pack your bags and leave immediately. Otherwise, if your other students get to know, they might even become very harmful to you. So he then exits from there, goes back to Takshila, but he doesn't join the school that is there. Instead, he sets up a teaching on his own on Buddhist scriptures. And in that teaching, he teaches this entire philosophy of Sarvastivada. And there he enumerates every day whatever he taught, he would convert that into one verse. Now look at the brilliance of these guys. He converts every day's teaching into one verse and inscribes it on a copper plate. So in 2 years, he had roughly about 600 such copper plates available. So after that, what he did, he strung them all in one string. Then he hired an elephant, got it drunk mad, and then he puts this copper plates garland on the elephant and sets it across in the streets with a challenge that anybody who is the Sarvastivada specialist can challenge him on what he has said there. And then he sends it across. In the meanwhile, what he does is, all these 600 inscriptions that he inscribed on the copper plates, he also inscribes on palm leaves. All these 600 verses, he compiles them together, puts in a bag of 50 pounds of gold, and then sends it to his main teacher at Kashmir. And says that this is Sarvastivada from my point of view. If any of you can challenge, here's the 50 pounds of gold. Then the teacher there and the students in Kashmir, they take a good look at that text and they are so impressed. They say, this guy used to ask so many questions, but he seems to be now answering everything that we have been talking about. So he looks like he's totally converted to our philosophy. So they're very impressed. So they don't use the 50 pounds of gold. They rather add another 50 pounds of gold. And they send it back to him saying that, listen, whatever you've written in verses, if you can write a commentary around it, a sambhashana, it will be very nice. Now look at Vasubandhu's brilliant mind again. He's already written the sambhashana. So what happens, he immediately sets that sambhashana and he releases it. But then, in this sambhashana now, where he had gone on based upon, the whole experience that we have, the Sarvastivada philosophy, he's countering it now with a philosophy which is different. And that one is talking about what the Buddha said only, basing upon that. Vamsiddhika. And when he writes that and sends it back to the Kashmir Pandits, they are aghast at what he says, those Buddhist monks. They look at it and say, this guy, he's not only mad, he is mad with fever. And they completely denounce him. But then now he is taking on all the traditional people who have gone by the Buddha's word. And he says, look, what you have interpreted as his word, means there are a lot of issues here. First, what did Buddha mean when he uttered a sentence? What did you hear when he uttered it? What did you understand when he uttered it? So there's a lot of transitions here, and he says what you understood is not correct, and what is to be understood is in a different way. And then it goes on, and then he goes on from there to mind only. That means mind is the source of everything in the universe, and he puts on that one. And it's a brilliant exposition that he's given, and all of this is in the time of the Guptas. So you see such great knowledge coming on both sides, whether it is the Buddhist or the Hindu side. This whole debate, that whole atmosphere of intellectualism that prevailed in the Indic regions of that time is sheer brilliance. But then this brings us to one more question at that time. During this period when Buddhism was so prevalent in the Indian subcontinent, to the extent that people came all the way from China, from Mongolia, from so many far-off places, and they came and carried this across so that we see the Buddhist imprint today right up to Japan and even China and Mongolia, we see the Buddhist influences. But it begs one question. Why is it that we do not see anything in Iran of that time? Iran is purely Zoroastrianism. How come it's happened so? How come Buddhist teaching did not even touch them? It's quite impossible. I mean, on the one hand, Iran or the Persian people were almost like a Vedic colony. They had their Avestan, the language is like a sub-dialect of Sanskrit. There is kinsmanship in terms of tribes who migrated from here or that side. I mean, it depends upon which perspective and what research you follow. So a very, very, a civilization out there which very much mirrored the Indic civilization in many ways. How come Buddhism completely slipped them? This is where, again, I think there's a mistake. Because what happened is that there's a slight debate as to who came first, Buddha or Zoroaster. And that's where the whole problem lies. Remember, we came across chronology where we realized that maybe roughly 500-600 years of Indian history from the Puranas has just been discarded as myth. And now imagine, as per that, and as per some recent findings in Lumbini, etc., where some wood was found and it's called trench number C5, and where they found out that Buddha could have been from even 1600 BC, which means almost 800-900 years before what is being currently postulated. So if that is the case, then Zoroastrianism actually came in much after Buddhism. And if that happened, then it's quite likely that in the interregnum between the earlier Hindu worship or Sanatan worship in Iran and the Zoroastrianism that they then adopted, there would have been a period of Buddhism. There's also certain texts found from Achaemenid kings, etc., who did mention destroying some of those, devas and whatever, which alludes to probably the way the Zoroaster's followers came up and they completely buried the Buddhist thought and everything. And then later came Islam, which so badly annihilated Zoroastrianism that any traces of Buddhism in Iran at that time is not even available to history. But remember, in history always, unless and until you look for something, you won't find it. So I will still urge the professional historians to look at a lot of data and evidence and search for further evidence to find out to what extent Buddhism had prevailed in Persia at that time. But anyway, coming back to the Indian side, we were talking about how Buddhism and the philosophy and even all kinds of philosophies were quite prevalent and hotly debated in the ancient Gupta period of India and subsequently. So from Gupta to Harsha period and then Shankaracharya, the whole debate between Hinduism and Buddhism, we shall cover as we go in our next episode. Thank you very much for listening to this short one. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks and keep well and keep safe.